Hey guys, how's everybody going? This is Dr. Bailey with Dr. Bailey's Evolved Health and Wellness. So I need a drink. Um, got a little bit of a different medical Monday today. Uh, Man, there's just so much going on right now with COVID and with vaccines and with the news and everything else that I wanted to take a Monday to kind of just sit and talk about that for a minute. Um, I think the biggest issue that we have across, just about all characteristics of life right now is the fact that there's not enough transparency, clear data, clear information, what's true, what's not true. So I wanted to open this up, kind of give a discussion about it. If you guys have questions about COVID, if you have questions about vaccines, if you have questions about medications, drop them here in the comment box. Give it a share, give it a like. We'll get some people involved here and see kind of what people's thoughts are. This came to me actually scrolling through Facebook this morning, and I saw somebody on my personal Facebook, which is a little bit different. But what it did was on my personal Facebook, I saw somebody post about a vaccine injury, and I said, "Man, in my military, in my medical, I hadn't heard of any of that." So I started doing some research, and of course, it hadn't happened. But it made me just kind of have a thought process. Hey, how are you doing this stuff? That maybe we need to have a little bit more open discussions about things. And the big thing right now is transparency, right? Everybody wants to know what's real, what's going on. One of the things that I've kind of thought of, and I'm going to actually start reaching out to some local hospitals, at least in the Tulsa area, is say, hey, what every single day, why don't we post out what the ICU census is? Then you don't have to worry about hearing it from ICU from Facebook. You don't have to worry about, hey, well, my friend's a nurse and they said that this happened, or my friend's a doctor and they said that this happened. You can actually see, and I can tell you right now, in the Tulsa metro at the major hospitals, you have less than about 10 beds, at least as of this morning, ICU wise. Now, that meant scare anybody? No, it's just a matter of fact statement. That's kind of where we are with the hospital bed situation, at least in the Tulsa metro. I don't have any reach to Oklahoma City right now, so it's kind of out of my jurisdiction. And I can find that out. It just takes a little bit of reaching out and touching some people and asking them. But I think that kind of changes some things, And the post that I read this morning that really made me stop and think about, hey, what's out there. And there was a post that somebody shared that said, "Oh my God, there was a nurse in New York that got the vaccine, got the Pfizer vaccine, and what it is, it caused Steven Johnson syndrome." And so, if you're not aware of what Steven Johnson syndrome is, it is a pretty rare, reactive deal that causes your skin to bull up and you have rashes and your skin will slough off. I mean, you end up in the burn unit. It's a big, bad deal. Does it happen? It does happen. Is it rare? It's extremely rare, but it does happen. I treated a couple different cases at the burn unit at Hillcrest when I was there. The surgeons usually end up managing those patients because of the issues that are associated with it. It's just like having a third-degree whole body burn. It's very bad. I actually reached out to one of the main Stephen Johnson's foundations in the United States this morning and said, "Hey, have you heard of any of this? Has this occurred in any way, shape, or form?" They actually replied to me in the email and said no, that was a meme that was made up by somebody who didn't want to get a vaccine. And I get it, I understand it, but I wanted to verify it. And so went through that. Full disclosure. For those who don't know, I'm in the military. I'll be getting the vaccine. And if you've watched this or followed me for very long, back in the spring, something that I talked about, and everything I talked about in March ish came true. The percentages of death rate, mortality was all about exactly as I said it was back then. And I said at that time, and I'm still not a big fan of a rushed vaccine. Now, I had to sit down and educate myself a little bit as to why. Why is this rushed? What's going on with it? And so the more I dug, it's kind of like a lot like cannabis, the more you go down the rabbit hole. But so mRNA vaccines have something that started way back in 2002, 2003, back when SARS outbreak happened. And SARS is coronavirus. That's why you hear every once in a while you see SARS CoV-2 or COVID-19. And so the problem is, and the reason mRNA vaccines just kind of didn't happen is the funding. I mean, anything that takes and deals with genetics and the genomic code is exquisitely expensive. And I hate to say it or I like to say it, just depends on the day. But with the pharmaceutical industry, is about at the bottom. At the end of the day, it's not the bottom dollar, right? And so if it costs a lot of money and there's no real foreseeable benefit, they're not really going to devote a lot of time and energy to it. So COVID happens, pandemic happens, mRNA vaccines are pushed. Um, right now, there's three looks across the entire world of COVID vaccines. The one that kind of hit the news, and I was like, holy hell, is that true? Was in Australia because there was some false positive HIVs. And they're like, oh my God, the vaccine's giving people HIV. Well, so the three different types of COVID vaccine right now are mRNA, which everybody knows about. There's Pfizer, Moderna, there's a couple others that are getting ready to come online. There's protein particle, which is basically little pieces of injected COVID, basically. And then there's a viral capsule. And so the viral capsule that they use, and it's really only been used so far in Australia, but they used an HIV viral transport. And so what it did was it had some proteins from HIV in it, and that's how it was injected into the cell. It didn't give you HIV, but it had proteins, which triggered the false positive HIVs. And eventually they was like, hey, we're not going to do this anymore because nobody's going to want a shot if they decide that they may end up with HIV from it. Now, looking at the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines, like I said, I'll be end up getting this sometime within the next 2 months. I assume with our military service and the things that we've got going on here in the state, and preparing for future trainings, because that's been something that's been um, heavily looked at is who's going to take the vaccine, why, when, where. I've heard a lot of people that get pissed like, well, the military should not be required to get this, and I get that, but if you guys saw the vaccines that we got anyway, like pre-deployment, I remember sitting there staring and counting the list of vaccinations we had to get to go to Afghanistan or go to Africa or wherever you're going to go. It's pretty dang extensive. And the efficient, the at least the data that we have so far for this vaccine looks a lot better than some of the old vaccines that we've gotten. So I mean, there is that too. Um, it uh, um, it is something that I'll let everybody know. I'll let everybody know how I handle it, how I feel. There's a lot of people doing that. Give it for you for what it's worth. I'll do the same thing with vaccines that I do with masks. I'm not ever going to force you or tell you you need to do something. I am going to tell you that you got one of two options. The mask and the vaccine is intent to slow the spread, do what it does, but it's going to cut anywhere from 3 to 6 months off in what I would consider normalcy. And this is all best guess, obviously, but um, without either one, I mean, we're going to continue in the same pattern we are for about a year till we get enough spread that unfortunately a lot of people are going to die. And the thing you got to remember is it is a it is a low death percentage. We understand that. I understand that. I think everybody understands it's a low death percentage. But when you have a huge number, then that number is getting to be fairly large. It does that low percentage starts to become a little bit more. Well, maybe that's a lot of people. Um, Now, the thing that's kind of sad about that is even doing, my daily appointments and recommendations and whatnot, I've met a handful of folks in the past couple of weeks that haven't left their house since March. Goodness. I don't know what to think or say about that because you only get one life. You only get so many years to live, and living inside your house in fear of that it is difficult. That's a hard pill to swallow. Now, I don't have a lot of medical issues or conditions, so I, kind of think about it that way. Sorry, kind of got off on a tangent there. Now, the big thing, so Pfizer vaccine. Um, Actually, before I start that, let me look at some of the comments here. Happy New Year's, everybody. I'm glad everybody's doing well. Mr. Holman, who should take the vaccine? I have health problems, diverticulitis, high blood pressure. The things to look at for the vaccine is this. It was initially tested for phase one, just generally healthy people without a lot of medical issues. And then as it progressed, they added folks with more medical issues and more medical problems. So it did well in all those subclasses and individuals. Now, another big thing that keeps popping up is Bell's palsy. There was 4 cases out of 40,000, or it was 37,869 patients, and there was 4 cases of it. What is Bell's palsy? So Bell's palsy is paralysis of the nerve. It holds your eye open, lip droops. The big thing to remember, and it's mainly the eye opening. So it was 4 cases in 40,000, give or take. Um, you can actually go to the Bell's Palsy Foundation. The natural occurrence of Bell's palsy is 4 in about 40,000. So there's no real correlation that even happened. And I can tell you, working in the hospital setting, the number one cause of Bell's palsy that I ever came across was dental procedures. Happens a lot. They hit the nerve when they're injecting, goes numb, it resolves in a day or two. Viral illnesses, just about all viral illnesses can trigger a Bell's palsy event. You can just wake up in the morning and have Bell's palsy. Again, that's not to say, hey, go get the vaccine. I'm just telling you, hey, Bell's palsy is not the big bad thing that it's being made out to be, especially in this instance. Okay. Another issue, let's see here. Oh, sorry, Jared, I got sidetracked there from your say. Um, who should take the vaccine? I'm not going to tell anybody that you should or shouldn't. I would love, I want everybody to be healthy. I want everybody to do well. But at the same time, you got I learned a long time ago working in ERs, working in ICUs, and I can tell everybody till I'm blue in the face what I would wish and hope. I wish a lot of folks would not smoke cigarettes. Cannabis is completely different, no chemicals in it. It's not going to cause cancer, COPD, and all that. But on the flip side of it, I have even today, I had probably 5 different patients having a video conference telemedicine appointment with me smoking a cigarette. And 3 or 4 of them are scared to death of COVID. And so, it will go both ways. Is it likely going to be protective? Likely. Do we know that for sure? No. We do have a good antibody response, and that's a positive thing. I think the big thing to remember, and a lot of people are talking about, well, you're going to have to get it every year. You may and you may not. The biggest thing that we're seeing with COVID-19 is that we've never been exposed to it before. And that leads to a rampant inflammatory response and the body's immune system attacking everything. That's what causes the biggest issues. Stan, hey, how you doing? Hey guys, let's see here. Mr. Bachman said, I'm an essential business, wondering when my class of people can get the vaccine. It's going to be slow, Carl. It's going to be real slow. The biggest thing is the dual production, and there's going to be dual injections. It's about 21 days apart. And the reason that is because initially you get antibody production, but you don't get the memory T cell production until later on. And that's why they're doing the secondary injection to hopefully prolong. Now, a lot of the newer vaccines that are coming through, whether good, bad, or indifferent, I said I'm not going to politicize, and I can push one way or another, just try to give it as much factual information as possible. Are coming down to one injection. That's the hope, but those are going to be a little bit longer down the pipeline, just because of the immune response that would have to trigger for that. And no, I won't have any access to the vaccine. That will be much larger. I don't think any like private clinics will. I think the major networks will eventually, but you're probably looking at midsummer to late spring, early summer maybe. Um, Autumn Keener says, "Am I for or against the vaccine?" Me personally, like I said, I've got to get it. I don't have a choice in the matter. Um, I'm really torn on it. I'm not gonna lie. I don't like the idea of something that's being the first in line for something. On the flip side of it, I'm gonna be first in line for it. So I've kind of learned that it's something I can't change. No really reason to get upset or get worried about it. Do I think it's got the chance to be beneficial? Yeah. Do I think that some of these older folks that or are high risk folks? Absolutely. I think that if we can at least get our high risk folks taken care of, then you know what? Then that's going to greatly decrease the death rate. That's going to decrease our hospitalization rate. We're gonna have improvements there. Um, if for anything, what I want to see out of this, and when we talk about the vaccines, and everybody's like, "Man, I don't want the vaccine," or "I don't want to wear a mask." Great, exercise more, eat better, quit smoking cigarettes. Use this as an opportunity to try and improve your health, and you don't have to worry about it. I had COVID and I got hammered for about 28, 30 hours. That's it. I was done. I got up, was fine. I had some dry cough for a little bit. I was fatigued for about a week, but still got up, did my work, did my normal at home activities because of COVID and everything else, working from home anyway. So it wasn't a big bad deal. But um, real quick, going back to this Pfizer vaccine, what is it? How does it work? What does it do? So the reason, so Corona is basically because the virus itself looks like it has little crowns all over it. That's what Corona stands for. And so what it does is it binds to a cell, and it has a spike protein that triggers the ACE receptor basically, and it enters the cell. and then the little mRNA, so mRNA or the little RNA strands. And so everybody knows about DNA. DNA is two RNA strands. So RNA is half of the DNA, and it triggers it to, it takes over the machinery. Um, and with the machinery of your own cells, that virus replicates or reproduces. Same way HIV and a lot of other viruses do. And so what we see is that with these vaccines, what they've tried to do is they've tried to trigger and mimic parts of it without giving you active virus. So polio is a prime example of the inactivated virus. There's a couple of other different vaccines out that use actual viral particles. What they've done with the mRNA of Pfizer vaccine is it basically triggers your cells to produce just the spike protein. And so that what it does is it produces that spike protein long enough for your immune cells to see it, say bad, create some antibodies for it, and then it dissolves. So the half life or the vaccine longevity is very short initially because all it's doing is trying to trigger that response. Now, what happens is in both the vaccine and in the normal infection, you got macrophages, you got your immune cells come on, they eat the cell, break it up, it dies. There's little particles left. Those are called antigens, which trigger antibody production, and then your immune system starts to ramp up. So the hope is that with all the virus issues or with the vaccine issues, that what they're trying to do is just trigger your immune response without making you actually sick. Side effects that we know of and that we've seen. Now, this is the one thing I don't like, and unfortunately, you have to weigh in the military. They basically tell us to mitigate risk. How much risk can we be mitigated by planning ahead and doing these things? We can't mitigate long-term vaccine possible injury risk. We just can't. We don't know. We don't know enough. I think anybody that says that we can is lying. And now on the flip side of it, is the risk worth it? Yeah, that's something that every individual has to weigh out. It is tough when you look at the big vaccine discussions that we've had. You know, the anti-vax push is a big deal, and I get it. That's a whole discussion for a whole other day, and we could probably do a medical Monday on. But you know what we have to think about is long term. What's going to happen? We don't know, and that if you look at all known vaccines, long-term risks are pretty minimal that we know of so far. The human body is an amazing thing, though. It changes. Every person's different. Everybody's immunology is a little bit different. Their underlying medical conditions, how they eat, how they drink, how they sleep, all those things are different, and it all plays a role in our physiology. So it is a very difficult thing to try to manage and look at. Ashley Mitchell, do you know if there's been any research on patients with epilepsy? They recommend me not getting due to epilepsy. As far as specific ruling out of epilepsy, no. I haven't seen anything. I've read all the documentation on Moderna, all the documentation on COVID. Did not suggest anything, but I cannot see it causing any issues because of the compounds within the vaccine itself. You have some lipids, you have potassium, and then you have mRNA. Should not have any issues with epilepsy at all, Ms. Mitchell. I wouldn't expect that at all. Do I do antibody testing? I do not. Working on trying to find a suitable, because the problem with antibody testing is finding it recurrently, is what I found. It seems like every time I find a clinic that does antibody testing, they're out by 8 a.m. and getting there, getting patients there is very, very difficult. So I don't have that. Ms. Keener, my active military. I'm in the National Guard currently. I belong to a big infantry battalion, Oklahoma City. Okay, what else was I going to hit on my list here? Did talk a little bit about Pfizer's. Oh, okay. And so the big thing somebody was asking about, when is the vaccines going to be available? So what we've got to look at is the temperatures. That's a big deal. That's a real big deal. So Pfizer has to be stored. It's like 35 to 75 degrees below zero or centigrade, actually. So very, very cold. So they have to come in special transportation and all that. Moderna's is like 10 degrees below, so much, much more easily transferable. So that is going to kind of either hinder or delay a delivery. Um, Again, guys, my hope with this is just transparency. I just want you guys to understand, want you to know, are there risks? Yes. But just like with anything, you're gonna have risks. We're getting walking across the street. The death rate of getting hit by a car is pretty low. But on the flip side of it, it's equivalent to a lot of things that we talk about on a daily basis. Um, let's see here. What other questions or any big? If you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, like I said, drop a message, comment on here. Let me know. I'll be glad to try it. To me, like again, to me, it's all about shedding light. Again, if you weren't here earlier, the hospital situation in Tulsa, at least ICU beds. I'm not talking general medical beds. ICU beds, we're about 10-ish. I'm gonna guess right now, and there's constant fluctuation up and down with those. They are shipping a lot of patients out. That is just a very real deal. Um, and you have to look at it from a big picture perspective of, hey, if I end up sick or my loved one ends up sick because of a heart attack or because something completely unrelated, then what do we do? Because there's no beds. So that puts me in a perspective where I don't want to force mass on anybody. I don't want to force anything on anybody. It's your guys', everybody's life to live and do as they wish. Um, if going forward, you guys have questions about something, and I see it, and unfortunately, COVID is just like the election. I mean, people see things that people create memes and stuff, and it gets shared, and then, oh my God, it's like a Steven Johnson thing. I saw it shared like 5 times, and I promise you, it's not true. It didn't happen. Not factual in any way, shape, or form. And again, I'm not telling you, hey, go get a vaccine. I'm not going to do it, but I'm going to tell you that part right there is 100% false, and it's people playing against the narrative. So if you ever have a question, you see something, whether you think it's legitimate or not, message me on the Facebook page. Let me know. Message the Evolve page. Come straight to my phone. I'll respond to it pretty quickly. If not, I can. And my goal probably with this is to do one of these discussions every few weeks, just to kind of keep everybody caught up. Um, let's see here. Sorry, my cousin Rick. We'd go over the time frame for both shots and the boosters 21 days, 21. So right now they're both set at 21 days. So the question was, you got to get a shot and you have to get a booster vaccination. And the reason for the 2 shots is antibody production and memory T cell production. So the memory cells produce obviously memory for long term, or what we're hoping is long term. And again, don't confuse long term with I'm never going to catch it again. The hope and the thought process is, knowing what we know about immunology, is that as we progress and the reaction isn't as potent the next time, the infection isn't as severe the next time, and then we kind of go on. Now, one thing that made me think about is the SARS outbreak in 2002, 2003. It just kind of disappeared, and that's really weird. We don't know why. We don't know why. We know the transmission was a little bit different, and we're already seeing some mutations over in the UK and whatnot. The mutations that we're seeing, though, again, that's another topic. I'm glad that kind of segued. My ADD went off, and we got into that. These mutations right now, at least everything that we're showing and we're seeing, these vaccines are still going to be responsive to. So no harm, no foul there. But right now, it's 21 days for both shots. Other than advanced age, what comorbidities are you seeing with hospitalized ICU patients? I've been sheltering in place since March. I don't know if I'm being overly cautious. So the big things that typically see is cardiovascular and diabetic type issues, because they usually go hand in hand. But I think, and it's hard to say because I feel like it's fluctuated, at least talking to the patients that I've seen, or the providers that I've seen, and then the patients that I've helped manage. And I've actually just starting to get ready to take over another facility that is entirely COVID, starting, I think, next month. So we'll definitely have some more up-to-date information then. COPD is a big one, but on the flip side of it, the general unhealthiness, I think people miss the boat when they talk about comorbidities and risk factors. If you have diabetes, hypertension, COPD, we need to stop right then, and we need to really start looking at how we're living, what we're doing, how can we improve our quality of life. And right now, there's a lot of things that we can do at home and do those things. So definitely. Chance Wilders, Dr. Bailey's Defender. You know, we used it a lot in the spring, and I got so busy I haven't even kept up with stock and supply and all that. I need to check in with the True Medics folks and see. Um, And that's a shame on me because like I said, I caught COVID this fall or this winter back in November. So it is something that Chance, I'm going to follow up on that because I haven't really done much with it, and I'm kind of curious to see what we could do with it, especially now that we're having a spike again in the fall. For those aren't aware, we had a CBD product, and we still do. I'll talk with True Medics and see that we produced that had licorice root, some other things. There's actually an active compound in licorice root. So for people that are curious about, hey, what can I do over the counter to treat COVID? So there was a lot of discussions initially. Hey, don't use ibuprofen, don't use NSAIDs. That's fine. You can use ibuprofen, use NSAIDs for. You can use Tylenol for fever reduction, those types of things. The big thing with NSAIDs you have to remember is food and water. Take them after food. You need to drink almost a gallon of water a day. Um, and then Tylenol, obviously, for antipyretics. Vitamin D is big. We're seeing a really good response to vitamin D and zinc. Big response there. And then in the hospitalized patients and in our ill patients, dexamethasone. And I said this back, man, one of the other COVID updates, because the biggest thing we were hearing back a few months ago was, oh my God, Plaquenil is going to save the world, which leads me to another one. Plaquenil, and I said at the time, there's just nothing there. We just don't see the response. And you're going to have people um, that say, hey, uh, um, they're going to try to get viral. They're going to say, you know what, this works, and the government, the FDA is trying to screw you guys and keep you guys from getting your hands on this. No, it just doesn't work. We saw in the hospitalized patients it didn't work, and what did work at that time, and I brought this up in that video, and like I said, it's several months back. It may be 5 6 months back, the video when I did the last COVID update. But dexamethasone, a real simple steroid, we see it, and it does really well, especially in those with lung involvement. That's a big deal because everybody wants to clamp onto a drug that's being left out. Now, something that I actually had a discussion with a family member of mine over the holidays, that's a pharmacist, and we were discussing ivermectin. It's a parasitic medication basically, but it has previously shown some benefit in preventing viral entry into the cell. So, hey, is that a possibility? It could, but I can tell you the side effects of taking ivermectin just normally is pretty. I mean, it's some GI, stomach. I mean, you're going to have some bouts of diarrhea, you get some nausea. So, you, as a prophylactic, they're talking about taking it ahead of time to help prevent you. So, you take a dose, I forget, 2 or 3 times a week, and then a maintenance dose once a month after that. Once you're through that initial dose, well then, hey, you just do your maintenance dose and you're okay, and you kind of get past that GI stuff. Is there some possibilities that may do something? It may. I like the idea of ivermectin more than Plaquenil. The main reason being is with ivermectin, the risk factor is this: you cannot, and I know it sounds bad, but you cannot quantify or tell how much fluid you're losing if you have diarrhea and nausea. That's hard to do, and you can dehydrate yourself really easily. So if you're on a lot of medications that may cause kidney injury, it's real easy for an elderly patient to put themselves in kidney injury if they have a real bad bout of diarrhea. So that is something to think about. Couples trying to conceive, Mr. Edwards. So I will say that in everything that I read did encourage pregnant or those hoping to conceive in the near future females. They were excluded from the vaccine trials. I don't have an answer for that. I wish I had a better answer, but that was something that was pretty much exclusionary criteria across the board. And I think that we'll know more as if it gone through all clinical trials and had your time frame as a normal vaccine and not the emergency use authorization. Probably would know a little bit more. What I would say is probably male is fine, female would not, Mr. Edwards. Ms. Parker asked about vitamin D recommendations and dosage. So it's going to depend on how low. So we use 50,000 international units for somebody with osteoporosis and severe vitamin D deficiency that needs to get caught up. And it's usually 50,000 a week for a couple of weeks. What I personally do is anywhere, depending on my sun exposure and all that, 2 to 5,000 a day international units. And then from there, see how I feel, and just kind of monitor it. You can't really, I don't want to say overdose, but I wouldn't do 50,000 a day. the 50,000 a week for a few weeks or even a month is probably not going to hurt. And then taper it down to 2 to 5,000 a week after that, and see, or 2 to 5,000 units a day after that, and see how you do. All right, Ms. Jones, lots of folks feel THC and CBD helps prevent COVID. Is there any truth to this? Prevent COVID? Absolutely not. Not even in a million years, coming from one of the biggest cannabis doctors in the state. I'm going to say that right now. Not going to prevent it. No way, no how. What it may do, and what I've been saying that I think it will do, is I think it's going to decrease the inflammatory response, which is actually going to help. And there's been several, that is something that I saw shared on Facebook several times over the past several days that I think has some pretty solid legitimacy to it, because we know that high CBD ratios of cannabinoids or endocannabinoids helps decrease and dampen that inflammatory response, the cytokine production, the chemokines. I mean, there's just a lot of different immune modulators there that cannabis affects. And we know that one of the big bad deals with COVID is the immune response is so rampant. It just pounds on our living tissue, because that's where COVID hides, right? And so do I think it's going to prevent it? No. Do I think that there can help? I really do. And I think that there's going to be some really cool information come down the line. And I think there's an opportunity for a lot of study there in how does cannabis affect the various inflammatory responses that we see. How is it going to affect not just inflammatory responses, but also how does it affect the COVID response? That, I mean, to me, I feel like somebody in big pharma should be looking at that. I mean, I hate to say big pharma, but it's going to take a lot of research and a lot of money to do it. But I think that there's definitely a way to do it. Let's see, no problem, Ms. Jones. Let's see here real quick. Let me pull this up here. By all means, guys, drop any questions. Vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc is best. Absolutely. Let's see. Now, Ms. Jones, vitamin C, vitamin D, and zinc is best to build our immune system. Zinc, and I apologize, I don't have the pathway off the top of my head, but zinc is something that even in the hospital setting, we typically see very depleted in viral infections across the board, depending on what the viral infection it is. But almost unanimously, we see zinc depletion. So I always encourage zinc. Now, I will say that me personally, zinc and magnesium makes me nauseous, and it's something that I just won't really mess with unless I'm just really having some issues there. So zinc is definitely a good supplementation. Vitamin D. So you're going back up here, Ms. Barker said her level is 20. 20 is kind of the base, the low level normal for vitamin D level. So I definitely wouldn't hit the 50,000 units. I would probably stay at the 2 to 5,000 a day supplementation. Remember, your vitamin D level is also directly associated with your sunlight. So getting outside and being outside, which is a little bit hard when it's as cold as it is. Now back to Ms. Jones, so vitamin C. What I personally do, especially when I'm having so my weight cuts for fighting or whatever, I know that at that time I'm immune compromised. I'm usually a little bit calorically deprived, kind of run down a little bit, physically beat up from training and so much. So I usually do 2,000 milligrams of vitamin C at 3 times a day. Now, most of the time, I do anywhere from 1,500 twice a day, kind of in that range. So, but vitamins are like anything, though. You can definitely hurt yourself if you do too much. I'll never forget in the VA when I was a medical student, we had several patients come in and they were septic because they had overdone the probiotics. And I'm talking took a ton. So lactobacillus, and actually ended up getting ill from it. And like I said, becoming septic, ended up in the ICU, those types of things. So multivitamins and vitamins are great. I definitely encourage supplementation because now, and even then, kind of off traffic a little bit, if you can eat it, if it comes from your diet, you're going to do much better. Your absorption is going to be much better. You're going to have all around a much better response. All right, guys, let's see here. Yeah, I definitely, I'm telling you, zinc messes me up. It just makes me nauseous, makes it not worthwhile. So just kind of going back and just over everything real quick. I just basically wanted to hit, hey, this is what's going on with the vaccines. This is where we are with COVID. This is what we know about COVID. It's constantly fluctuating. You know, it is kind of it's kind of a lose lose a little bit from a medical professional standpoint, because I'm going to be the first to tell you, and anybody that says differently is wrong. Medicine's an art. We're constantly learning. It's constantly evolving. Look at cannabis. I mean, cannabis is something that is gone from one extreme to the other in the medical society, as well as health and benefits. And so when we look at it from a perspective of COVID, there's a lot that we don't know, but we have to rely on what we do know. We do know how the immune system responds typically. I say it's typically. We do know how vectors or how transmission is typically. So it is something that we have to kind of balance out what we do know, what we don't know. We have to admit, and I think that's a problem. Again, transparency is a big deal from the medical community. I'm going to try to do a better job of answering those questions and getting out to folks about those things, because I don't feel like we've done a good job. Let's see here. Jared Edwards asks, so is it true if you take the vaccine, you can still be a carrier of the virus and still spread it? If so, what is the point of taking it? So the vaccine itself, what it's doing is it's triggering your immune response. And can you still obtain it? I don't have that answer. I should you be able to? No. It should prevent you from having. It should be able to theoretically kill it. Now, you have to realize this: that when you get that vaccine, it takes 14 days ish for antibody production, and so I mean you're gonna have some variation on that. It's also why you have to get the booster at 21 days to get that long term. So you could contract COVID at the time of injection, shortly thereafter, a week thereafter. It's definitely something that there's a lot of variability to when he talks about getting it and spreading it. Now, assuming you get it, you get the vaccine, time frames work right, can't carry it. You definitely won't carry it. Could you still get it? Yeah. But it should minimize your not only the severity, because what it's doing, all it's doing is it's acting like a primer on your immune system, right? It's basically like if you're going to go pull start your lawnmower, you hit the primer on your and it fires right up. You hope. Same thing with the vaccine is it's priming your immune response so that it doesn't have to sit there and let the virus replicate or grow to a huge number and then attack it. Ms. Forbes, am I the Dr. Bailey that does research? Absolutely. All day, every day. Well, almost all day, every day. Let's see here. And that's the big questions. All right. Pull up just a couple things real quick. Again, guys, if you have any big questions, something that you're curious about, I mean, I know that there's a ton of miscommunication. Um, Elizabeth Forbes asked, since it has mutated, do you think it'll end up like the influenza? So, no. Here's what we see with influenza, and a lot of people aren't aware of how the vaccine is produced for the flu every year. So what happens is you get a flu strain that starts somewhere in China and it spreads across. Now, where does this get a little bit murky? COVID. I'm pretty sure, and I think anybody that's looked at it on either side of the fence is going to agree. COVID's probably been here longer than we agreed or we were prepared. We were prepared for. And so with influenza, it starts in roughly China, and what happens is we culture people starting in I don't even know April I think over there, and then those cultures are flown to usually I think it's Germany, but there's various CDC or World Health Organization centers all over Western Asia, Europe. And so what they do is they're constantly sampling the population. And then what they try to do is they transmit that information over to the pharmaceutical companies, whoever's producing the flu vaccine, and they try to guess where that next mutation is going. Now, influenza there's a ton of different variants and strains that attack a little bit differently each way. The good thing about corona is the virus itself doesn't, especially when it's a SARS strain. There's not a lot of variation to it. There's the protein capsule is the same, the crown-like structure is the same. There is a slight difference in the spike protein, but it's not enough to trigger anything without completely changing the viral makeup, if that makes sense. Now, could it happen? Absolutely. I'm not going to try to play God with that. I mean, we've seen some way uh, different things or worse things than that happen scientifically and just biologically in the world. So, could it happen? It could. Do I think it's going to happen? No. I think that looking at it at least, and another thing that I mentioned earlier, in 2003, the stuff just disappeared. We don't know why. It's still not affecting children to the degree. There's a lot of questions in why it's not affecting children. I say it's not. It's just very rare. And in 2003, it's the exact same way. And we think it has something to do with children's either a couple things, or two or three. Either A, children are exposed to so many different coronaviruses as they go that they're just like, hey, they've already built up a little bit of immune response to it, or B, they don't have enough of the receptors, the ACE receptors throughout their epithelium of both the respiratory tract as well as the GI tract that allow them to actually catch and transmit the virus. So that is just a whole other thing I think is going to be interesting to see as we progress. But no, I don't think it's going to mutate and happen just like the flu at all. The flu is a lot like HIV, and I hear and when you hear this, you understand why. Because a lot of people are say, "Well, how come we haven't gotten HIV figured out yet?" Because HIV acts like the old dodo bird in the commercials or the cartoons that simply walks into the wall and hits its head all the time, right? HIV hits its head all the time, and every time it hits its head, it mutates. Every single time, boom, boom, and so it's constantly changing, and that's where the big struggle with HIV for decades has come. Starting to make some headway into that area as well, but kind of gives you an idea of viruses in general. So let's see here. Novel viruses are crazy. Yes, they are. And what makes it a novel virus is just it's novel because it's unknown. It's new. There's not a lot of information on it or why it acts the way it does. And we're going to get more and more. Again, the big thing to look at is this. Um, try to figure out how long does this last. That's the big thing. One last question. If you test positive for having antibodies or even COVID, should you take the vaccine? Once you get it, can you get it again, or is there a one-hitter quitter? Boom, 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 boom. So, if you test positive and have antibodies, do we know if you're going to get if the vaccine is beneficial? We don't. That was actually an exclusionary deal for the vaccine. They didn't want previous infection, or another thing that a lot of people hear about is, well, I caught COVID twice. Um, don't think that's happening at all. What we think is happening is we're not clearing the initial illness. You're getting a little bit better for a week or 2 weeks, and then from there starting to decline again and getting ill. So what we think is happening is immune response. As you're kind of hammering it down a little bit, but you're not completely killing it off. It's re-emerging itself. Your immune system saying, "Oh crap, I didn't kill it all," goes back to attack it, get sick again. But we really don't think that you're actually reacquiring COVID. Should you take the vaccine if you've got antibodies? I probably wouldn't, and you're probably not going to be on the list to get the vaccine for a while anyway. It made the leap from animal to human made it a novel virus. Yes, but good luck tracking where that came from. We think that it came from bats in 2002 and 2003 because a lot of them had been domesticated in China. Again, it was the Wuhan province. Um, do we know though? Good luck. Now, as genomics testing, CRISPR testing, a lot of that stuff comes back into play. I think we'll be able to figure out a little bit more about where it actually came from, because we do know to cross over species, it takes a decade or more of constant reinstitution of that virus to get there. Let's see here. Make sure I'm not missing anything on the other updates. Boom. Right. This is awesome, guys. I appreciate everybody's input. And again, I like to make these as beneficial as possible, and I see stuff all the time on Facebook and it makes me cringe, and I don't ever really comment or post, but I would rather just get on here and just kind of air everything out at one time. Share the post out if you have questions, or if you come across somebody else that has questions, let me know. I'll be glad to do everything I can. My goal is again transparency and try to make as much information available because you guys can make educated decisions on your own. And I say this, my own family. I got folks in my own family that don't care about masks, don't care about vaccines, don't care about anything. And it's not my job to make them care. All I do is just say, hey, this is what I know, this is what I've seen, this is what I've researched, this is what we think is happening, and then let folks make the decision on their own. And I feel like good, bad, or indifferent, that's what we have to do in this role in the general population, um, because you're not going to force folks to do what they don't want to do. Trust me, it just doesn't work that way. All right, a couple more questions going through. Boom, boom, boom. I think I have everybody answered. All right, y'all. That was way longer than I typically intend. I hope it was informational. I hope you guys got something out of it. Again, if there's anything that you're ever curious about, want to know, let me know. I'll try to keep people updated as much as possible. I really am going to reach out. I've sent some emails out. I'm super curious as to how we can get the hospital censuses posted without violating HIPAA and all that. I think it would be beneficial. I think that every single day, if the hospitals had to report what their ICU bed supplies was, um, I think that we would be in a different place, at least information wise. Because I think whether you believe in something or not, whether you want a vaccine or want to wear a mask or not, I think if you realize that, man, if I'm getting in a car wreck and I'm going to have to be flown to somewhere in Missouri because there's no hospital beds here, that may change your perspective. I don't know. It may not. But it is information. Ms. Forbes, do you think it was man-made or made the leap? I think it made the leap. I think that the biggest thing is because we've seen SARS virus before. I mean, we saw it, I said 2002, 2003, very similar. This one is just, it's spreading faster. It's spreading, it's more communicable. The number one way is droplets, and that's when we talk about the masks. The masks are not going to be 100% effective. Nothing's going to be 100% effective. Washing your hands and wearing masks is going to be about 90-95% effective. And I think that's another big thing is that people are concerned. They're like, well, that mask can protect me anyway. Well, not 100%, but I mean, hell, you can get hit walking across the highway, walk across front of your house if you really think about it from that direction. So, um, it is one of those issues that's going to continue to come out and evolve. But I don't think, again, that it was. I don't think it was man-made. Might be a different discussion if the death rate was higher. Um, because you got to think about it from the stance of this is worldwide. It's not just attacking the United States. It's not just attacking any ethnicity or whatnot. Now we know it is hitting some minority populations a little bit harder than others. Not real clear why. Maybe if it's not seeking out medical help, because again, we haven't done a good job of opening up to different communities or what. I did see an interesting discussion the other day of the homeless population because everybody's like, well, how come the homeless aren't getting it? Well, there's a lot of social isolation that happens with the homeless population. For one, in New York, for example, they did go around and any homeless patients that tested positive or were exposed, they put in hotels and isolated. I don't think that anything like that happened here, but again, that is something that's been discussed, and that would a lot of people are like, well, how come the homeless population doesn't have a higher death rate? Well, it's just because of the social isolation that socioeconomic class is unfortunately stuck with for the time being, at least, and that kind of helps explain that as well. Comparing H1N1, why were we able to get a hold of it faster? Is it because of the way it spread? Yes, I think so. In H1N1, the transmission is a little bit different. And the whole thing you got to remember with virus. So H1N1, it's a completely it's a completely different genetic code, I guess, is probably the best way to put it. It was a little bit easier to isolate. It was a little bit Corona. Even going back. So this is going back, man. I don't even know how many years. This is probably going back 18 years, something like that. Um, Even back then, when they were talking about coronavirus, they were talking about how hard it is to isolate, and that back then it was kind of funny. They were talking about how it really didn't make any difference on, or it was very hard to isolate. And they said, hey, you don't even really need to test for it, just treat symptomatically. So I think that that played a big role, but the isolation of the particle itself has been hard. I think that also leads into why initially we had a ton of false negatives. I know there's a facility up in Bartlesville that was in the news in like March or April because it was a long-term care nursing home facility that contracted a ton of COVID. Well, I actually sat and met with them, and the reason they had a ton of COVID patients and had to go into quarantine and isolation, all that, is because they were getting all of the patients from the hospital discharged to them, and the hospital was testing these patients and it was coming back negative. And then 3 or 4 days later, the patients were still symptomatic and they're like, hey, something's not quite right here. And so they would retest them and boom, they're all positives. And so I think that that's where we came into an issue of, hey, how are we getting spread? That's the other thing. Testing, the longer from exposure, the higher, like I said, it takes a while for antibody production to start going. So that's why a lot of these, if you get sick on day one or if you're exposed day one and you go get a rapid test, it's probably going to come back negative whether you're positive or not. That's definitely kind of something that's throwing the wrench to our plans. All right. Those are great questions, man. I really appreciate everybody's input and questions and statements and stuff. It's been super, super helpful. Um, let's see here. So basically, all we can do for a virus is to write it out because it's almost impossible to find a cure for a virus. Yes and no. Um, so what we're trying to do is dampen the immune response and slow down the severity so that you don't end up in the hospital. A lot of people are forgetting that all this is, the whole push is to um, decrease the amount of time we end up in, or amount of patients end up in the hospital. And if we decrease severity of illness, which is a big thing, and that's the whole thing, you prime that immune system, your severity of illness goes down. And it's hard to find a cure because they do mutate so fast. Some things mutate very quickly. You got to think the COVID's been out for a year, or longer, probably. I would think that it's been longer, but at least for a year. And at that point, I mean, it doesn't take much to have a mutation. And a mutation is just a mechanical screw up on the cell's production part. I mean, it wouldn't take much to have a mutation. So that is something to think about. And again, it's just determining how severe or how big that mutation is depends on how it's going to affect you or how it's going to affect the vaccines or anything else. All right. You guys have all been awesome. See here, let me check all these other pages real quick. I think I've got everybody's questions answered. Boom, 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 boom. All right, guys. Um, man, I really appreciate everybody's input. Appreciate everybody getting on. If there's something you guys are curious about, feel free to post on one of the event pages. I'm going to try to do this periodically because obviously it is the big issue right now. It is a huge, huge deal with misinformation and transparency. So I want to make sure that we provide as much straightforward information as possible. Again, I'm going to let you draw your own conclusions. I'm just going to lay it out there for you, and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure it's as accurate and not biased and just straightforward as possible. All right, you guys, I hope everyone had a very Merry Christmas. I hope everybody has a Happy New Year, and then we will see everybody next Monday.